Insight with Tian Wei, legacy of the First World War on its centennial. How has it shaped the world order? And a meeting of minds on business between China and Canada. Free trade in the works.
Canada is a trading country. We believe in free trade and we believe in a rules-based system.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The program is coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. November the 11th marks the 100th anniversary of the end of World War I, and since 1928, people gathered to commemorate soldiers who died in the Great War and in big conflicts since then. About 70 world leaders, including U.S. President Donald Trump, Russia's Vladimir Putin, and Germany's Angela Merkel, took part in a ceremony on the Champs-Élysées in Paris on Sunday morning. What does history tell us? Can we really learn this time? Before we start our discussion, take a look.
At 11 a.m. local time, all over the world, bells mark the precise moment of the end of World War I, a century ago. In Paris, French President Emmanuel Macron invited more than 60 world leaders to commemorate the 1918 event. Under overcast skies and drizzle, they walked together to the ceremony near the Arc de Triomphe. US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin, rivals today, shook hands. 100 years ago, their two countries were allies. Macron sent the world a clear message.
Patriotism is the exact opposite of nationalism. Nationalism is its betrayal. By saying our interest first and never mind the others, you erase what is most precious to a nation, what makes it exist, what makes it great. What is the most important is moral values.
In another part of the city, preparations were underway for an anti-Trump protest.
But Trump, he antagonizes a lot of the values that I don't share with him. So I'm against him coming here as an invitee, as a guest, you know.
British Prime Minister Theresa May and members of the Royal House did not travel to France but marked the centennial in London. For the first time, a German president joined the ceremony. With thousands of others, Frank-Walter Steinmeier commemorated the end of the war, which killed more than 16 million people, although the exact number will never be known. Back in Paris, Macron told those in attendance, and perhaps to some in particular, that there are universal lessons to be drawn from World War I, that multilateral international cooperation and not selfishness must prevail over rancor and resentment.
Is the world order after the Great War shifting? Let's loop in our panelist. In Beijing, Zhang Junshe, senior captain, who is the vice president of China's Naval Research Institute. In Moscow, we invited Mark Sloboda, an international relations and security analyst. In Washington, D.C., Steve Pruitt, who is a managing partner at Wetz Partners. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Mr. Pruitt, the world is changing very fast. But are we getting ever more chaotic, particularly over the past few years, with the United States apparently seeking a different direction?
Well, I think it's easy to describe it as chaotic. However, that kind of skips over the fact that we've got a president in the United States who is a master of chaos. And yes, things have changed. But surprisingly, I think many would argue that they've stayed the same. He really hasn't impacted the world order of things all that greatly because he doesn't have a plan to do that, and certainly doesn't have a plan going forward that would accomplish that. So, yeah, it's chaotic, but it's certainly not, I think, game-changing by any measure.
Concerns are the word being used by many that to describe what they feel about the current realities of the world. Mr. Zhang, of course, we are doing this on the 100th anniversary of the end of the First World War. A lot of lessons we learned from then, but you know what? Our memories are just always very short.
Well, we have learned a lot of lessons from the two world wars. One of is that one country should not develop its own interests at the sacrifice of other countries' interests. And second, I think we need international organization, the United Nations, and also we need the United Nations Charter, which advocate equality and also respect for sovereignty for other countries. And also one important lesson we learned from the two world wars is that the imbalance of the economic and political development is the root of wars. So we have seen the fascists of Japan and Germany actually to a large extent have chosen war because of the economic crisis.
Okay, I see. Well, let me go to you, Mr. Sloboda. There are several issues that we need to handle. One is the international governance system. The other, of course, is about so-called national interest vis-a-vis common interest, as we are getting, like it or not, more globalized. Certainly, of course, it's a relationship between the rising power and also the existing power. These are the issues that we see today that could, in a way, compare to what was going on in the build-up to the First World War and why the First World War eventually came to an end. Mr. Sloboda, about international governance system, now you see the United States apparently, once again, I want to emphasize that, want to withdraw from some of those and do not believe many of those organizations are in the interest of the U.S., which has been an instrumental party to establish that international governance system. Mr. Sloboda, what do you make of this part of the discussion, at least?
Yeah, I think what we see with the United States, its control of many of the international institutions of global finance and so on, the World Trade Organization, the World Bank, and others. And moreover, their control, their power over the international finance situation is something that has been abused to a great extent by the United States. And with the latest round of a war of sanctions and tariffs pretty much against the entirety of the rest of the world, be that China, Russia threats of sanctions against India, the European Union, multiple threats there, and even some U.S. close allies like Canada and Mexico. The U.S. is really pushing the limits of its power to a very close extent, such that you are starting to see countries that are trying to break out of the dollar-denominated global financial system. We see it not only with China and Russia and Iran, countries like this, but also with the European Union, which is trying to find ways to continue trade, particularly in energy, with Iran after the U.S. Unilaterally pulled out of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. So in a way, we see currently a big backlash against these institutions and this governance system, whether formal or informal, because the United States has, in its attempt to maintain its unipolar hegemonic status, has pushed other countries too far.
All right. Mr. Pruitt, of course you need to respond to that.
Well, I wouldn't totally disagree with that statement. I think there are many of us who believe that in his transactional behavior, the president is not only driving hard bargains, but that he's doing so in ways that don't necessarily respect the party across the table. So, yeah, they've maybe gone too far in several instances, but I think when you talk about the larger impact on international governance, where we've actually pulled back have been those instances and examples are limited. What we've done is change the engagement and involvement and how we behave in many of those organizations, and I'm not suggesting that it's good behavior, but I'm certainly suggesting that the behavior has changed.
Is the United States trying to show to the rest of the world that the rules of the jungle is exactly the rules of the world?
No, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that statement either. I think what you have to understand is that much of what is coming out of America is focused by the White House and the President on marketing America. Again, I don't necessarily agree with what is coming through in those messages, but I think the methodology and the technique that are being applied are what need to be focused on and understood better by our world partners, and that will equip them to better respond to these things. And I think some of the nations in the world are indeed starting to figure this out, and once they figure it out, then it becomes much more amenable outcome related.
I see. About the international governance system, Senior Captain Zhang, of course, China is an important part of it. After the World War II, China is part of the UN Security Council, permanent member of it, P5, together with the United States. And also China has been benefiting from the international system since the reform and opening up over the past 40 years. But about this governance system, when the U.S. is having at least an apparent attitude change, whether like it or not, what would be the role of China and what would be the role of the others, so-called maintaining this current order, or in a way try to adjust and so-called reform, update, whatever word you want to use in a way?
Well, actually, it is true that the moves taken by the Trump administration have caused worries in the international society, because we have seen that he has announced the United States is withdrawing
right.
from
But the question is,
rules.
what's next for countries like China and others? What to do with this international governance system?
Well, at first we will stick to the multilateral trade system and also cooperation with each other and respect for each other. I think mutual respect, this is first. Second, I think we need necessary reform of the international order. This is also true.
What kind of reform of the international order you are talking about, Mr. Zhang?
Well, I think the international order now is not so ideal to all the people, all the countries, because we can see now power politics, hegemony, still exist, and is not equal, or some countries have been treated not so on an equal foot. So this is, and also some countries have launched some wars against others without the consent of the UN, United Nations.
Mr. Sloboda, your thoughts here. That is individual countries' own national interests vis-a-vis a so-called win-win situation, a situation in which everybody could have a share of the outcome, positive outcome. Is that too much to wish for?
Yeah, I think that is a little unrealistic, considering the nature of humanity, the world, and the state of relations between different powers. I mean, this may come as a shock to some of you, but the United Nations is not a democracy, right? Not in any way, shape, or form. All real power is concentrated in the Security Council, and the Security Council has a very limited real mandate, and that is to prevent great power conflict, particularly nuclear conflict, between the great powers at their table. Unfortunately, the entire system, international system of law and architecture is rapidly deteriorating, and the principal reason for this is for the last 20-25 years, the unipolar power, the United States, has been consumed by a supremacist ideology of exceptionalism, where they view themselves above the rules of international law, where they maintain a system of international law for our enemies and impunity for ourselves and our allies, like say Israel, and you know, it very much is a rule of the jungle order. We just heard, you know, in the last few hours, the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that you know, regarding the new illegal unilateral sanctions that the U.S. is throwing by itself against Iran and other countries that'll do business with them, that if the Iranian leaders want their people to eat, they will get in line, right? And that exemplifies, you know, this hegemonic supremacist ideology that still dominates U.S. foreign policy.
Okay, there are a lot of big words that Mr. Sloboda used in his arguments. Everybody having your own perspective. Mr. Pruitt, having said that, though, what would this mean? Particularly now, it is not just about what the U.S. is also behaving. It's also about the rest of the world, including some of the rising countries that have really some concerns about the U.S. And therefore, what would that mean for the incumbent power, as they say, and the rising powers? Mr. Pruitt, when you think about the First World War, it's really about powers. And now, when we are at a critical juncture, it's also about the insights into powers. What exactly is your thought about that?
I think the environment in the jungle is always changing, and it requires those people who survive in the jungle to adapt as well. And I think the key thing that we're seeing in many respects is a lot of people who maybe 20, 30, 50 years ago did not focus on what changes they needed to make are now starting to focus on those changes and are looking and negotiating to do so in ways that really make the negotiation look harder and tougher than it really is. And I think at the end of the day, the U.S. is no longer in the position where everybody has to negotiate off of their piece of paper. I know, having negotiated a number of labor agreements, the main objective you try to go into these discussions with is to get the other side negotiating off of your piece of paper. And the U.S. is no longer in that position to do that, although the fact that they come into the meeting with a piece of paper where previously they were the only one at the table that had one, that whole environment has changed. So I think, yes, it looks ugly, it's rough and tumble, and the engagement sometimes can be brutal, but at the end of the day, I think there's a great deal of change happening whether we want it to or not.
All right. Mr. Zhang, I don't know whether you can read the words between the lines from Mr. Pruitt's answer. He's trying to suggest, it seems, that the United States, under the current administration, is using certain kind of strategy to push what they believe as important issues and yet taking a long time not being resolved. Mr. Zhang, I want to ask you about that. As a result of it, nobody's going to feel very comfortable. Of course not.
No.
Because the other parties are pushing, and not necessarily in a polite way either. But the question is, what will be the response from the other parties being pushed by the United States, and how the other parties would interact with one another regarding that, their relations with the U.S., isn't it? Mr. Zhang, about that part, what do you think could be the lessons and the things that we could learn from the previous two wars?
Well, just as I said, that one most important lesson we have learned from the two world wars is that one country should not develop its own interests at the sacrifice of other countries. Now we have seen that the Trump administration of the United States has been punishing almost all the countries, including its allies. So the
question really is, Mr. Zhang, what will the other countries do, including China? And how will the other countries interact among themselves? And how will they interact together, to a certain extent, with the United States?
I think China and also other countries, Western European countries, and also Japan, India, we all express our hope for multilateralism, and we all are opposed to unilateralism and protectionism. And we want to proceed with a more just system, a trade system, and also a political system in the world.
Okay, Mr. Sloboda, your thought?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of hope for multilateralism and reform, specifically because of the stance the United States has taken, the last decade of regime change, occupations, the 9 countries it's currently bombing, and its refusal in international institutions to yield power respective of growing economic, military, and political strength to other countries, in particularly the BRICS countries. And we see a declining share of U.S. power globally, and that's due, first and most importantly, to the international system of unregulated global finance that it created, a neoliberal global economic system that wealth transferred itself to the point of lowest resistance, which was China and other Asian countries, because of cheap labor and so on. And that's led to a global transfer of wealth and power. And secondly, and something that's described very well in Mearsheimer's and Stephen Walt's latest books, The Great Delusion and The Hell of Good Intentions, that the unipolar moment of hegemonic power led the U.S. to a crusading impulse to maintain and extend that power, and that has cost the U.S. It's facing a global kind of imperial overstretch, terms both financial with $20 trillion of debt, and military overstretch, where it's still trying to assert its national interests, as it calls them, in every corner of the world, be that the South China Sea, the Black Sea, or Africa and the Middle East. And these are hastening U.S. decline. And while it's something that's coming to a focus with the rhetoric and the nature of the Trump administration's tone, this is something that has been carried on through previous administrations. It's not new, and it is somewhat inevitable.
All right. Mr. Pruitt, you want to respond?
I think suggest to people that, as my previous commenter said, that this is not new. This has been going on for some time. I think the major difference that we see today versus what we would have seen at the end of the First World War, for example, is we see these things happening in real time, thanks to media like CGTN and CNN and others that are broadcasting this information daily, 24 hours a day. The fact that we're seeing it in real time gives us a much greater level of sensitivity, a greater level of intelligence, as well as reason to come up with options. And I think throughout the world, what I see is many of those countries are indeed coming up with other options, which is why it looks so chaotic, if you will.
A fascinating discussion, certainly a very short period of time for such a gigantic topic. I'm sure we're going to continue in various occasions when we talk about the specific issues. The logic, though, are very similar. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Zhang Junshe, Mark Sloboda, and Sleep Pruitt. Thank you. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on the program, a meeting of the minds on business between China and Canada. Is free trade in the works? An interview with the Canadian minister right after this break. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The program is coming to you Monday to Friday on CGTN. The first China-Canada Economic and Financial Strategic Dialogue kicks off on Monday in Beijing. Chinese State Councilor Wang Yong and 2 ministers from Canada are co-hosting the meeting. Launched last year, the dialogue aims to promote understanding and cooperation between the 2 economies. As Canada looks to diversify its trade strategy, a free trade deal with its second-largest trading partner, China, is something on both countries' minds, yet the prospect is shadowed by a controversial clause in the newly signed trade agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada.
Economic globalization is facing big challenges. Fixing the problems requires the urgency of improving economic governance. China is willing to work hard in step with Canada and act against unilateralism and protectionism, safeguard and strengthen the rules-based multilateral trade system.
Whether connecting our economies in a way that strengthens growth or connecting our people in a way that encourages understanding, the Government of Canada believes in a positive and productive relationship with China. We must work together to make the most of the economic opportunities that exist between our 2 countries.
Earlier, I sat down with Mary Ng, the Canadian Minister on Small Enterprise and Export Promotion. We talk about improving trade ties with China and the importance of small enterprises in the Canadian economy. Madam Minister, what a pleasure to have you on CGTN.
It is wonderful to be here. Thank you so very much.
We understand the trade disputes going on between China and the United States. We also understand Canada is trying to work on a trilateral trade negotiation result. Madam Minister, what do you think about the prospect?
Well, we're working very hard at, at an agreement, with the United States and Mexico. Free trade is really important to Canada, and not unlike the present situation. We have had, tariffs levied against our steel and aluminum, and I can say that, that we will always, as a government, stand up for our workers and stand up for Canadian businesses in Canada.
Having said that, though, while you are standing up for the businesses, one would assume that there might be some challenges, both for the general economic picture and also for the future world's concept about global trade.
Yes, of course. I mean, Canada is a trading country. We believe in free trade and we believe in a rules-based system.
Whose rule is it?
I think it's I think it's the world's rule. I mean, I think it's we've benefited from a rules-based system. We have benefited as a country in job creation through free trade. So it's really important for us to keep opening access, greater access into markets for our Canadian businesses.
But how could you do that?
Well, I'll give you a couple of examples. Our government, has concluded a trade agreement with the European Union through CETA. In Parliament, my colleague minister, has proceeded to ratify the CPTPP in our Canadian Parliament, meaning that we will be trading with the Asian Pacific countries, about 13 countries, so really important for Canadian small businesses and medium-sized businesses so that they can have access to these customers in these global markets.
Right. Having heard all of this, Madam Minister, it seems that you're suggesting, with the efforts coming from Canada, that the world picture of trade and trade mechanism actually could be facing a dramatic change. Can you help us to grasp the real nature of this transformation?
For us in Canada, as I said, we are a trading country, and having our people put into trade agreements is really important. The trade agreements that we have negotiated of recent, have chapters in it that actually provide access to markets for our small and medium-sized businesses, but it also provides access, to women entrepreneurs and women-led businesses as well. So having our societies considered and be a part of those trade agreements is a very important thing for the prosperity of Canadian businesses, but all businesses.
How do you see the fact that some of the biggest economies in the world are retreating from the global system, at least apparently for now? Whether it's a negotiation tactic or it is a long-term nature of those economies, we don't know for this moment. What does it mean for all of us And as a result, how are we going to adjust and at the same time thrive?
You know, Canada will always, advocate against protectionism. We will always advocate for, open markets and greater access for, for our businesses abroad. A successful negotiation of trade agreements with the European Union or with, with CPTPP. And in fact, Canada is the only G7 country that has a free trade agreement with every other G7 country. So I would say that that this is something that we work hard to do, and this is the kind of access that that our country will want our businesses to have access to those markets, and that's how we're going to be able to create the kind of growth that we are looking for our small and medium-sized businesses in Canada.
Which is going to benefit you more and your constituency? Is it only bilateral, or it is going to be a combination, bilateral, multilateral, trilateral, you name it?
Well, I think that trade diversification is a portfolio that my colleague minister has, and this is sort of why I'm here as well, right? I mean, this is a good time to diversify. It's a good time to make sure that we keep exploring opportunities around the world, and that we keep exploring and securing greater access to these markets and to these customers for our Canadian businesses.
On the other hand, at the time of challenge, given what is happening right now, to you, what are some of the priorities of your work?
Right. I'm thrilled to be the Minister for Small Business and Export Promotion. Small and medium-sized businesses are really important to middle-class Canadians, really important to our economy. They're 90% of our businesses are small and medium-sized businesses in Canada. So my job is really, the way I describe it is, I help businesses start, I help them grow and scale, and I help them find access to international markets.
You're a babysitter.
Well, I would like to see
a proud
and a
servant.
Yes. A proud supporter of all our small and medium-sized businesses. Their growth means economic prosperity for Canadians and for our Canadian middle class.
For Canadian small and medium-sized companies, Chinese medium-sized companies, and others, one of the biggest challenge is they don't have the bargaining power individually. However, when putting together with the support of the government and with the support of the right idea of global trade, they could thrive. But the thing is how to put them together, and also how to think beyond boundaries. That's very important.
I was here, even while in China, I was able to meet with a number of Canadian entrepreneurs. And it's interesting because I met them here in China. And why is this really important? It's really important because the part of my portfolio, which is about export promotion, is really to help these small and medium-sized companies find opportunities so that they can grow their enterprises in global markets. So speaking to Canadian entrepreneurs, the small and medium-sized businesses, as I have done, is really encouraging because they are growing, and they're growing globally. A Canadian enterprise with Canadian research and development, but they are finding customers and co-locating.
But what if they are facing difficulties overseas? Your largest neighbor, for example, is an interesting case study. Currently, how are you helping your small and medium-sized companies to go through this, apparently at least, difficult times?
Well, domestically at home, my job is to help small and medium-sized businesses become export ready so that they can take advantage of the trade agreements that we have completed and the market access abroad. And then we also, what I like to call, Canada's best sales force. So we have the Trade Commissioner services that operate 160 offices all around the world. This is Canada's best sales force because they operate in the world, and they are able to help our Canadian SMEs understand the market, the customers, and how best to access that, and put financing together to help them scale and grow into these international markets.
China and Canada have been working together on trade and many other issues, but many ask the question, at this crucial juncture, can the two countries, together with the others, be inspiring and aspiring enough?
Yeah, Canada and China have a deep relationship and a strong friendship, and we already are doing some really exciting initiatives together. I mean, we have signed a joint agreement on climate change, and we have also signed an agreement around agriculture exports and imports. So, and this year actually is 2018 as a result of the Prime Minister's trip here in 2016. This year is the year of Canada-China tourism. So there are many things that we are already working at as a country, and we will continue to continue that work and continue the exploration of collaborating together.
Madam Minister, you might be much more well aware than many of the others that China and Canada established the diplomatic relations very early in the day, because Canada was the very first so-called Western country to establish diplomatic relationship with China. And it was during the Trudeau Senior administration. Many in China, in Canada, remember those historical moments very well. Having said that, though, we are in Trudeau Junior administration, and people wonder what's likely to be the strength that this administration to put into the bilateral relations.
Right. Well, China and Canada, you're right, has a deep history and a fond history.
It takes a lot of political guts to do it at that time.
Indeed, indeed. And I look at where we are today. China is Canada's second largest trading partner. Just in this last year alone, our bilateral trade was about $100 billion. And Chinese Canadians are they're an important fabric of the Canadian society.
Absolutely.
There's 1.6 million Chinese Canadians in Canada from coast to coast to coast. So the people-to-people relationship really is a platform or a cornerstone for us to keep working on our on our friendship, but also on our economic collaboration. So there is wonderful opportunity ahead.
What are you suggesting?
Well, what I'm suggesting is what we've already started doing, right? I mean, we've already entered into into discussions, and we will continue to the two countries to work to find ways to work together, perhaps towards a free trade agreement, but we certainly have already started those, and we will continue to do that work.
Is there any agenda or any timetable for starting a conversation related to exactly the topic you just mentioned?
I would say that that the work has already started, and any work that we're going to do will always be done in the interests, to the interests, for Canadians and for the Chinese as well. So
for the win-win.
It is a win-win.
The win-win, what does it mean for the Canadians? What are the most important priorities?
I think that, speaking as the Minister for Small Business and Export Promotion, for me, a win-win is making sure that I am fully behind and being the biggest cheerleader and champion for the growth of our small and medium-sized businesses in Canada.
Talking about China-Canada relationship, we also see these two countries at this great juncture of time having the guts to speak out. That, many say, is also very important in today's world. Do you think Canada will still be able to do that in this administration, despite maybe some of the challenges from your neighbors?
Well, I mean, Canadians expect its Canadian government and leadership to, to speak out and to affirm Canadian values. So whether that is, domestically or, or abroad, I think that Canadians can be comforted by the fact that that their government will always speak, in consistent with Canadian values.
Belt and Road Initiative, Madam Minister, is an important idea that China provided to the rest of the world. Well, at the same time, it is also inviting partners to work together on this idea. How is Canada looking at this idea? I know Canada is participating in AIIB, and also Canada has been working on with China to develop it in a third-party country. But how does it work from now on?
Well, I think that that our continued dialogue, which we have at all levels of government between Canada and China, is a perfect way to be able to continue those exploratory discussions between our two countries.
Madam Minister, you is a crystallization of Asian Canadians and the role that the Asian Canadians have been playing in the Canadian society. You yourself was born in Hong Kong, in fact.
I was, yes.
So what was it like to be from a Hong Kong girl transforming yourself into a minister currently working for this administration, which very much emphasizes, of course, on women's role and also on equity coming from different kinds of ethnic groups?
Right. Well, you know, I'm very proud to be a part of an administration, you know, led by Prime Minister Trudeau, and to be a part of his gender-balanced cabinet. But you know, and as a, you know, as a Chinese Canadian, someone who grew up from Hong Kong, I think I'm going to give a bit of the credit to my own dad, because the Prime Minister, you know, speaks of himself as a feminist, and I would like to say that, you know, that I regard my father as a bit of a feminist. I mean, in Chinese culture, you know, and I would think that at the time that I was born, he actually, you know, probably had some conflicting ideals, right? I mean, he believed always that a girl could do anything that a boy could do, and essentially instilled that in me, and I'd like to think that that certainly set me up to a path of being able to, you know, to aspire and to work hard, and believe that that if you work hard and you aspire, that anything really is possible. And I hope that by taking on this role now as a cabinet minister in this, you know, in this government, that there are going to be a lot of women like me and a lot of Chinese women like me who feel that participating and working hard, they can follow a path way better than, you know, way better than mine.
You're very modest, Madam Minister. Having said that, though, how do you see about the so-called old immigrants and the new immigrants coming from Canada, particularly from the mainland? There has been a wave of them, and also the Chinese students right now in Canada.
It's wonderful to have, you know, to have the diversity of people in Canada. I think that that recent immigrants or Chinese students have, you know, have done well, you know, in Canada, is simply because we are a country that embraces, you know, inclusivity and diversity, and so
hard work as well.
And hard work. So so I think that they do find commonalities, you know, and find settling and participating and being educated in Canada something that is a really positive experience for them.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.